Thank you for taking the time to come and be part of TEDxSnoIsleLibraries 2020. All around our region and state, across the country, and around the globe, people just like you and me are hungry for ideas and information. We all want to know more. We want to imagine, and we want to understand. And TEDx events are organized to provide opportunities to connect us with ideas worth spreading. TEDx has lent Sno-Isle Libraries its name and approach, allowing us to independently organize this local TED-like event. Because at its core, your public library is all about providing you with ideas and information. And together with TEDx, we have worked to share some of these ideas with you. Now, the really hard work to make this happen has come from each featured speaker and all those who have worked with them behind the scenes. So we invite you to sit back and imagine you are sitting in the largest theater ever. You are appropriately social distance in this virtual space where other members of the audience are all choosing to be present. We are all expectant. We're ready to think deeply. And we are reimagining the quantum connections between ideas and realities. And now, on with the show.
Hi, I'm your host, Phil Klein, and I'm here with Ya-Ling Liou to celebrate her debut of her TEDx talk. So welcome to TEDxSnoIsleLibraries 2020. In this program, we'll be sharing voices of community members who are shaping and reshaping our world for the better. In each of these sessions, we'll be sharing and debuting their talk and then having a curated conversation to dig deeper into their ideas and to hear directly from the speaker more about their ideas worth spreading. With me are also a team of moderators and a co-host to provide any support we may need. And if you're new or returning attendee to TEDx, in your homes or on the streets of Italy, as I know some people of our viewership are, welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us. Throughout this time, you'll be invited to ask questions in the chat, in the Zoom webinar, or in Facebook Live, wherever you may be. And we'll do our best to cover as many of those questions as possible. So without further ado, it's time for TEDx. Welcome, Ya-Ling. You're a chiropractor, a chiropractic physician, author, teacher, reducer of suffering. It is so good to see you again.
It's great to be here. It's nice to see your face.
Yeah, it's great to see yours as well. It has been such a wonderful journey to think with you as you've prepared your talk throughout these last few months. And so I wanted to start off by asking you, what was it that led you to want to give this talk? And why did you feel it was important to give now?
You know, being a chiropractor, people come to see me hoping for relief from their pain. So I've had a lot of opportunities over the past 25 years in practice to witness and learn from a lot of different pain experiences. And I started noticing a pattern. And it was that very often people who are or were at some point high physical performers, so that could be high school athletes, it could be dance performers, ex-military. For some reason, I noticed that those people very often weren't able to as easily tell me about their pain. They had a lot of trouble describing their pain to me, and a big part of trying to help someone is finding out more about the situation. So that was very puzzling and kind of fascinating to me. And my thinking around this was that, you know, these folks who have pushed their body to extremes repeatedly also have become used to downplaying their pain for the sake of the game or the performance, you know, the show must go on kind of mentality. And I started to think about how we hold that up as the gold standard. But here they are in terrible pain, unable to even tell me what's going on. So that started getting the wheels turning. And, you know, the rest is a sequence of events that has led us here.
Wow, thank you. That is a great background for this. To our audience, I'll just say you're in for a real treat with this talk that really explores the universal and everyday experience in a new way of pain. So relax, open your minds, and look forward to this video. Let's roll it.
Have you ever felt the tickle of a hair on the back of your neck? And did you try to swat it away just in case it might have been a spider? You probably wouldn't have done that if you never had that one previous experience with an actual spider that you thought was just a hair. Our unconscious expectations, based on past experiences like that one, shape our future reality. And it's no different for pain. No matter what the cause is, whether it's from how we sit or stand or from a combination of inflammation and stress, once we're feeling pain, the intensity and how much we suffer from it is largely determined by our past experiences with pain. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett is a psychology professor and researcher at Northeastern University. While studying emotions, she noticed that both emotions and pain share the brain's predictive mechanism. In other words, instead of being a reaction to outside triggers like posture, inflammation, and stress, the way that we think, the experience of pain, just like emotion, is technically a prediction, an estimation that the brain and nervous system make based on past experience. Think of when a toddler falls down and skins their knee. What's the first thing they do? There's usually a pause, right? They don't cry right away. They take time to look around at others to try to figure out how they should react, because their young brain doesn't yet have enough experience to predict the outcome and the expectation of that new event. Chances are, after looking around at whoever's nearby, that toddler might hear either something like, "You're fine, walk it off, come on, let's keep going." Or, "Oh, poor sweetie, come here, let me help you with that." Or if the crying starts, maybe even, "Stop your crying, get up, what will people think?" Those are all really different messages, but each reinforces the idea that either we are bad for having pain or pain is bad and should be stopped or ignored. Now, there's nothing wrong with moving forward from pain, but what if, before we do that, we find a way to welcome and make space for this very valid and universal experience? You might be wondering, why would I want to welcome pain? Okay. Have you ever tried to stop or ignore feelings like anger or sadness? You can definitely do it, but emotions have a way of resurfacing eventually. And when they do, they can be much more confusing and overwhelming because the context, our understanding for the experience that initially triggered those feelings, is long forgotten by that point. And in some cases, might never have even had a chance to form. If, as the neuroscience suggests, both pain and emotion share brain biology, consider for a minute the possibility that ignoring and dismissing first signs of pain might not be so different from suppressing our emotions. The more we push it aside, the more we lose that connection and understanding with what was going on when the pain first started. How are we supposed to cope with something we don't understand and have no connection to? So then years down the road, when there's an unexpected, debilitating version of that same pain, it too can be extremely confusing and overwhelming. When I was 7 years old, I had my own very first painful stiff neck. This unfamiliar stabbing and shooting with every move of my head had me in tears. So my parents took me to the chiropractor for the first time. The problem with that early treatment experience was not only did my pain not go away, but I was not invited into the conversation that day. The doctor spoke with my dad, and then he handled my spine without explaining anything to me. My memory of that experience was so unpleasant that I actually completely blocked it out until years after, ironically, I became a chiropractor myself. Now, I understand that in all of my professional work, I'm constantly striving to provide what I wish someone had offered me all those years ago. Back then, I was left with no idea why my neck hurt or if there was anything I could do for it myself. And by being excluded from the conversation, I missed the opportunity to find my own words for the experience, to create context, understanding for myself. And sure enough, for decades after that, I continued to have seemingly mysterious relapses of that same neck pain, each time with worry and confusion. You know that quiet pause after the toddler falls down, but before the crying starts? That is a window of opportunity that we all have every time there's a new pain. It's during that window that we can create context for our pain experience. Context gives us a framework to make sense of what happened to us. That framework can either be full of fear and confusion, like it was for me at age 7, or it can be full of empowerment and reassurance. Creating context of any kind starts with conversation. How we talk to ourselves and how others talk to us about our pain early on really matters. But I'm finding that many patients aren't even talking to themselves about their own pain because they're so busy ignoring and dismissing it the way that we've all been taught. So when a professional like myself finally asks about it, many of us are missing the right descriptive vocabulary for our unique pain experience. This creates a serious problem for anyone who treats pain because without clear descriptive details, it's really easy for doctors and practitioners to misunderstand and unintentionally to project their own pain beliefs and biases, which can lead to the wrong treatment. The way my own chiropractic practice has evolved, I find myself mostly treating what I would call common, everyday aches and pains. Despite how that sounds, this sort of pain can be extremely severe, overwhelming, and confusing. What's worse is that it often seems like it came out of nowhere because there's no significant injury or event to help explain it. For example, patients will tell me things like, I was just relaxing on the couch after a long day, but when it was time to get up and go to bed, I could barely straighten up, it hurt so much. Or I'll hear something like, I felt fine when I went to bed, but when I woke up, I could barely lift my head off the pillow. My neck hurt so much. I want to tell you about Jane. She's a patient of mine in her late 50s, dealing with a familiar lower back and hip pain that's just been coming and going for years. The first few times I saw her, she was in too much discomfort for me to do my usual hands-on work. So in order to find a way to be helpful, I really needed more from her than just hearing her say, this is where it hurts. My standard questioning goes something like this. What does that pain feel like? What's the sensation? How would you describe it? Or what does it compare to? I'm listening for descriptive words, adjectives like stabbing, tingling, aching. Instead, I often will hear combinations of words like muscle pain, nerve pain, tendonitis pain. Those are all nouns, assumptions that can make us and others think that we know what the source of pain is. But remember, sensation doesn't necessarily correlate with our assumed expectations. That tickle on the back of your neck, is it a hair or is it a spider? So when I hear combinations of words like that, nouns, assumptions, my response is, okay, but what does that feel like to you in your body right now? And it's this kind of questioning that helped Jane to pay attention to the pain that she'd been working so hard to ignore and push through all these years. My need for a more detailed description let her know that paying attention is in fact vital for reconnecting with the context, which can lead to better pain coping. So after those first few visits, Jane came back to tell me that she was experiencing overwhelming relief. And quite frankly, I was puzzled because my professional training taught me the way to get results is with hands-on care. And up to that point, I had done very little with Jane besides just talking. But she explained her pain was still there to some degree, but her relief was from our conversations. Connecting and describing things helped her to see everything in a whole new light, one in which she plays a crucial role in the experience of her pain. She was describing better pain coping. Now, compared to things like cancer and broken bones, everyday aches and pains just don't seem that important. So it can feel really reasonable to ignore and push through these types of pain. But you know, if you've done this, the pain does not go away. We're simply forcing ourselves to adapt, just like with suppressed emotions, until we just simply can't adapt anymore. But remember, the science is showing us that pain and emotions share mechanisms in the brain and nervous system. So wouldn't it make sense to address early signs of pain in the same way we would do with emotions? You know, if we do it in a healthy way, of course. What would that look like? Psychologist John Gottman at the University of Washington did research that was instrumental in developing what is now widely referred to as emotion coaching. He was studying parenting styles and found that in families where emotion coaching strategies were used, those kids demonstrated measurably better emotional coping and emotional resilience over time. He identified 5 specific steps that are shown to help kids develop healthy context and language around difficult or intense emotions. And this is what it would look like if we were to do the same thing for earliest signs of pain. The 5 steps are: pay attention to it. Don't push it aside. Acknowledging pain and emotion, big or small, does not mean that you are weak. It means you're paying attention. 2, name it. Finding words to describe any new experience can make it a lot less scary. 3, validate it for yourself and for others. If pain and emotions are rooted in our biology, it's real. You're not making it up. 4, learn from it. There's usually a good reason for pain initially, just like with emotions, initially, before we suppress it for years. Reconnecting with the context helps us to discover what that reason was. And 5, problem solve. This is where you go get help so that you can learn how to help yourself in the future. When my patient Jane initially told me about her relief, I was attributing that success exclusively to step number 2, the power in naming the pain. But the closer I looked at Gottman's work and all of the 5 steps together, the more I recognized every single aspect of almost each patient encounter in my office. Like every other chiropractor, I also learned how to do the traditional spinal treatments that we are known for. But that dramatic joint cracking just isn't always appropriate. So for some time now, I've been incorporating other techniques, more gentle techniques as well. Taking time with the muscles and using ice and heat. I used to think that all those extras made me less of a chiropractor. But spending all that extra time with each visit lends itself really well to more in-depth conversations. My patients are not just finding words to name their pain. The ones who see lasting relief from better pain coping are going through all 5 steps of Gottman's proven strategy. This 5-step approach has real potential to create better coping and better resilience for all of us at any age. This stuff works for emotions, yes, and it works for pain. My hope is that after today, you remember this as the moment when you started a new relationship with your pain. We've all skinned our knees, and we will all have everyday aches and pains. But it's becoming clear now that the experience of pain today has the potential to transform tomorrow's pain. So try to stay open without judgment, and by expressing a caring curiosity, you can transform pain for yourself and for your loved ones by mindfully walking through the 5 steps. Pay attention to it, name it, validate it, learn from it, and problem solve. What's most important is to seize that window of opportunity right after the earliest sign of pain, but before the crying starts. That's when you can choose how to speak to it and how to move forward in life. Not without pain, but with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ya-Ling. That was really a wonderful tour of what it can mean to regenerate or to generate for the first time a new relationship with pain. Can you tell us a little more about what it feels like for people that you've worked with, or in examples where someone has a new relationship with pain? What is that like in felt or lived experience?
From my perspective, from my vantage point, what I'm seeing and hearing is a transition to a more playful relationship with the symptoms, the discomfort, and a wider array of tools, not just in words, but in ways to cope and deal with those flare-ups here and there. So, for example, someone who has had time to talk through what's going on for them, as they become more comfortable and coping better, they'll come back to me excited to tell me about all the different things they noticed about this latest flare-up or the lack of. Or sometimes people will come to me and tell me that they're noticing that they're still stuck in that old way of thinking about the pain. And so that's huge progress to me.
Wow, so even seeing that there's a repetition and a recurrence, that can be helpful for people.
I think that's the beginning of being able to launch into using the 5 steps for ourselves, is to recognize what we're doing in those moments. And it's specifically with the words used to describe pain, the temptation to draw conclusions and to jump to, well, this is my sciatica, or this is my this pain. And, it's watching yourself when you think those things and saying, oh, that's a noun. And what does it actually just feel like? Maybe I should check in with what's the sensation? Is it stabbing, tingling? Where do I feel it? When did I feel it? Those kinds of things.
When did it start and how long has it been going on? Wow. So just ongoingly engaging. It strikes me that the time and duration of this process can vary a lot. You started out with the description of the toddler who has that pause when they've skinned their knee before they start to cry. If you're watching a child doing that, you could just see the change in that. What am I supposed to feel come over their face before they start to either cry, and they're looking for that cue from an adult. That does seem like you're widening that time of response. And then as adults, what helps people to sort of slow down so that they can catch that moment between the initiation of the pain and the, oh my gosh, that pain has been going on for so long, I just want it to stop now.
Yeah, I think there has to be a little shift in a lot of us seem to think that we're being babies when we pay attention to pain, and that we should be able to just shake it off. And so I think first of all, it has to start with a change in how we think of our reaction to pain, and being, allowing ourselves to be human. And then, it has a lot to do with that. And remind me what the question is. Sometimes I will go off on a tangent.
No, that's great. I did want to shift a little bit to get a sense of the different kinds of pain that you tend to focus on, and also kind of like, what is the scope of the kind of pain that should be addressed here, and where should you maybe, instead of sort of toughing it out, after you've done the four steps and you get to that problem solving, when you might kind of jump directly to problem solving?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question. And that brings me to an idea about the 5 steps not having to happen in an order, because sometimes we need, in order to be able to stop and pay attention and slow down and take those moments, for some people that means quelling a fear and looking at what to do to be able to find our words. For some, it's going to be that the words are vehicles towards that end. For others, it's going to be finding out from a professional that they're okay, they're not going to die, and that's where we all go with our minds when something painful happens, right? Is this the beginning of the end, So it may be any one of those 5 steps that can help any individual, depending on who we are, turn down the knob on the stress level and the anxiety about it. That's going to have to be the key to being able to tune in.
It sounds a little like there are these different layers or related layers of, it's not even the pain itself, but it might be my stress about the pain or my anxiety or fear or worries and doubts about the pain that can actually not only amplify, but can probably even hide, like really being able to have the language. I'm so busy in my head thinking about what does this mean? And how do I address that? What will help people to sort of relax that anxiety? Is that an additional part of this journey?
I think it is. It's definitely something that it's the starting point. And what I find is that, so you can go back and forth with what is it that's going to quell that anxiety for people. But I really believe the most practical reason to be trying to find your words to describe pain is really about getting the right treatment and finding out what is really going on, or the right assessment. So, for example, if you've woken up with a stiff neck, what you might want to think to yourself is, okay, so I woke up with a stiff neck. Did I manage to get out of bed and then get into the shower and have some relief from the hot shower? That is going to be a different kind of situation that gets different kinds of attention than if you woke up and you could barely get out of bed, and then you remembered the day before you fell off the deck, and you're realizing there's more to it, and you've got pain in your arm now too, or you can't feel your hand. Those are the details that are really important to dig for, so that you can tell someone and get the right direction. And when you get the right direction, you'll find that most of the time it brings down the anxiety quite a bit. So that's one place to start, but everybody's different. So
yes, but this is something of a universal, like first response kit in a way to how do you deal with pain? Pain is often ongoing, or may last for like it be intermittent, and it can be all these different types. I hear you in addition to sort of thinking about these 5 steps, paying attention to pain, naming it, validating it, learning from it, and problem solving, that you're kind of growing a language for us to, even in each of these areas, like paying attention to it can actually mean a combination of things. Like, maybe we could just walk through each one of the 5 steps and sort of share a bit about, like, what is it like to give it a little more color and texture for us when you pay attention to pain.
Right. And it's important to know that the paying attention piece, there has to be a shift in how you pay attention. We want it to be without judgment, without assumptions, and without all those voices, those parental voices in our heads, right? We're trying to shift away from that. And so when we can pay attention to it and just say, this is a valuable sensation, and I need to find out what this is about, because it's a message, and the quality of life is going to be impacted depending on how you pay attention to it. So just noticing and feeling okay. Don't be ashamed to notice pain. It doesn't mean anything about you as a human being.
And then starting to get a little closer to it with that attention.
Right.
And then naming it. You mentioned using descriptive words, painting, what was it? The stabbing, tingling. What are some other words that people tend to use when they're describing pain that can be helpful for them?
Yeah, it's not getting too caught up in the specific word is what the answer would be here. Words are really helpful, and it's important to try to find words that fit your experience. But that's the other thing. It's going to be, there's no wrong way to talk about your pain. It's about painting a picture and really fleshing out the situation, the circumstances, so that you can go back and understand, oh yeah, is this similar to that other situation that I had? And if so, then is it workable, or do I need to go get help? It's really the best place we can be is to know when we need help and when we can be okay on our own. And it's a process getting there.
And I guess that naturally leads to validating it. And when you say validating it, I want to distinguish between validating the prediction of pain, right? Versus validating the experience of the pain more directly. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, I can see how that could go in an unpredictable way. But I'm hoping for, conveying with the information about emotions and the biology behind both of those things, emotions and pain, is that we just have to accept as a society that pain is a valid biological experience. And the more we get that message out, the more I think it'll be easier to say, you know what, I'm having a pain and it's okay. And I'm going to figure this out. It doesn't have to, it's not all in my head, even though it has a lot to do with your brain, but it's a real thing. And anybody who tells you otherwise, have to watch my language.
Well, always, right? Words are like little children. So we have to care about them, of course. And so then leading to learning from it, learning from our pain, you used your own example of experiencing pain early on, and you also had the example of the pain of various people you've worked with. What is it? Can you describe what the unfolding of a learning from pain? What have you learned from your pain?
Well, and this is, so for my pain, I really didn't start learning about it until I went to chiropractic college. And I learned intensively about physiology and anatomy and biochemistry. That's what triggered it for me. I needed that to be my vehicle to get to a place where I would think more about, well, what was it that happened way back then? But learning is going to happen differently for everybody. So, and then there's this pitfall, this potential pitfall that, well, are you learning maybe an unhelpful, are you taking on an unhelpful lesson? So you really have to clean up the messages that you're giving yourself before you know that saying, don't believe everything you think? That's really important here.
Wow. So, well, it's a little challenging, right? Because we also have to trust, you're asking us to trust what we are experiencing as well as.
Yeah, I think where I need to specify is if you're jumping to conclusions and thinking the worst and going with your anxiety on this, just know that that might not be the reality. So it's those nouns. If you hear yourself talking to yourself in determinate nouns, then you might be on the wrong track.
So having an open mind, a learning mind,
Yeah.
a little bit can help with that. And then in terms of problem solving, it seems like there are lots of solutions looking for a problem to solve that it can counter us. If you're online, there are plenty of, cures all over the place trying to suggest we are the solutions to all of your problems or to this problem or that problem. How do you help us think about problem solving in that constructive way that is, honoring of our individuality, but also reaching out in a healthy and appropriate way?
It is going to be, again, one of those individual things, but that's the fun, that's the fun process of discovering what is it that works for you. And for some people, it's going to be the biomechanical piece. It's how they sit, it's how they sleep, it's the pillows they use. For other people, it's going to be what they're eating before bed. Maybe they're having, a fifth of scotch, and that's not going to do well with the body's inflammation level. So there's always a different way to look at it. Emotions. I often will see people come for help when they're going through a big move. They're moving from one city to another. They've got a lot of change. Maybe they're breaking up a relationship or starting a new one. Those big emotional changes can also add to our inflammation load, which can cause pain. So finding the solution is going to depend on those circumstances that hopefully you have found the words to describe. And that will be the key.
Your voice is very comforting, but I'm reminded that you're actually asking us to break up the relationship that we've had in the past with our pain, and asking us and inviting us to have a new relationship with that pain. You're asking us to break up with those old voices that are telling us just, you're fine, just ignore the pain and push through it, but instead to kind of receptively listen to that. So I'd love to widen the conversation to think about, what is it like in a world where people actively address their pain and actively respond to them in the healthy way that you envision us doing?
Yes. Yeah. My ideal world is threefold, but bear with me. So the ideal world that I picture would be one in which we value and spend as much time improving pain coping as we do with pain killing, right? At least as much time. And to do that, I really think we need to start with the kids. We need to introduce this idea of the 5-step process to kids, specifically where pain is concerned. So, and that would have to happen with some help from the parents and teachers that are around them 24/7. So that would be one avenue. Our healthcare providers, what would it look like if our healthcare providers were taught about the value in these 5 steps? They seem really simple and easy to gloss over, but when we hold them up as significant parts of treatment, what would it be like to go see your healthcare provider who takes as much time with pain coping as they do with helping you relieve the pain, however it is they're trained to do that? For long-term relief, I think it'll be really groundbreaking. And then just my perfect world, there would be, for the rest of us who have had familiar aches and pains on and off for a lot of years, what would it look like to have regular preventative physical medicine treatment, something that is supported by the healthcare industry? Think of all the cost savings to having a regular check-in with someone who can help you tune in and figure out what sensation means what in your body specifically. That takes time, and it takes regularity and regular checking in. I think doing that could prevent more serious situations that then may require costly procedures or lifetimes of medication. I mean, it could be huge. So I like to dream big.
Oh, and this is the right place and the right time. I don't think anyone would object to having well-addressed pain and less pain and a future that promises that. But we do have to find a way to get to there from here. And so I'm going to turn to some of the audience questions. I have this question from Zoom. As an adult, how can I retroactively create context about pain that's been going on for years when the initial event is so far removed and maybe forgotten.
Hmm. Yes, sometimes we have things happen before we even have developed language, right? That's a very tricky thing. For myself, as I was saying, the way I created context had to start because of my learning style. It had to start with the didactic, knowing more about my body, having all the facts and the details. And for others, it's just going to have to be a gradual checking in with someone who can give you that objective and non-judgmental view on what's happening in your body right now so that you can be in the present with it. And at the same time, while you're working with what's in the present, you're unraveling and maybe walking backwards through injuries that you don't have to remember the details of, but that will start to become uncovered with the body work, which is actually what I see a lot of when we address parts of the body. Sometimes there is some it can trigger memories about things that have happened to I more than once. I have people lying on the table long after I took their initial intake, and I hear things like, oh yeah, there was this time when I fell on my head, and it's just we forget until we're checking in. So there's a lot of value to just having someone's hands on you, and getting that guidance.
That's great. That's great. That's a great way to think about that. Another question is, how do I, if I'm someone and believing that the body wants to heal itself and that it's trying to do that, but that some of these past experiences have interrupted that or asked me to just ignore that pain, how can I return to the natural healing that my body wants me to have?
Mm. Very good way of looking at that. That's you're on the right track, whoever that was. And it is about removing the obstacles that fall into the three categories of biomechanical, learning what it is that you're doing with your body mechanically that isn't great for your particular body style. Finding out if there is something biochemically that's just continuing to irritate your system and keep it from healing. So it's about removing those obstacles, and maybe there's some emotional trigger. More often than not, I love hearing about people's difficulties at work because I don't work in an office space, and it gives me perspective on what people deal with working with others. There's lots of interpersonal stress at work, at home, that can create that emotional strain, the emotional triggers, that can add to the pain experience. And so looking at all three of those things and finding out which of those obstacles need to be removed or modified so that you can make way. It's like rearranging the rocks in the river, right? So the water can flow smoothly again.
Mm-hmm. And we have another question that's a little on this subject is, what can my workplace do to help ensure a more supportive environment for the stresses that people with injuries or discomfort face?
It's a very forward-thinking question. I think that we're definitely moving towards being more focused on self-care and health in the workplace. But it would be great if that became more of a standard where we could have on-site health care or an on-site check-in for people who need to find out, oh, this hurt here. But I understand a lot of people have an ergonomic department now, and maybe we can add a more psychotherapeutic aspect for workers to go check in with someone and say, I'm feeling really whatever, and see if it's connected to their pain. Or it's a great idea to play with, actually. Let's take notes.
Yeah, well, so you mentioned that this is something that it starts early in life, and we have a question about, what can parents say to a child when a child injures him or herself that would help to improve their use of these kinds of steps?
Yeah, this is something I had a question about as well. And actually, I was my attention was brought to this. There's actually a parenting technique that is called sports casting. One of my patients who's a psychologist, we've had some really good discussions about this. And apparently this sports casting approach is just what it sounds like. And it's something that is held up as a pretty high standard for supporting kids in growing and learning, but without imposing our judgments and, qualitative assessments. So it's just like saying, what's happening? Oh, you fell down. Well, isn't that interesting? And just waiting for the kid to decide for themselves what their experience is. And, they may just get up and run off and no big deal. Or for them, it may be quite an emotional experience. And so you just kind of go with, and then you have to continue sportscasting.
Wow. So constructively responding to
Yeah.
whatever the child initiates and
Right.
helping them to work with that. And there's probably differences at different ages so that they can
Probably,
start
exactly.
to.
Yeah.
So in other words, let them find the words themselves that they may have.
That would be my thought. And this is an area that I'm really excited to actually flesh out more. And I think it would be great to have some psychology voices in on this, so that we can really get a full picture of what it is, like you said, developmentally. There's a lot to be considered, and it's important to do it right.
That's really great. So I think you did mention, at least in one of our conversations, that there are three kinds of typical storylines that
Yeah.
adults will use with young children.
Right.
And can you maybe remind us what those are so that we can either look at them freshly and maybe consider not using those, or reflect
Yeah.
about how we want to use them more carefully, and then maybe what an alternative to those three voices might be?
Yeah, that is really the thing, that if you do nothing else after today, at least stop and notice what your reaction is when you have pain, or if you're having a relapse. Stop for a second and think to yourself, well, which of those three toddler parent voices am I listening to? Am I the walk it off and be tough? Am I listening to that voice? Or am I trying to make it stop at all costs and not checking in? Or then the last one would be, are you embarrassed to tell people about your pain because you're worried about what people might think? Those for me are the three big categories. And I think we all have some version of each at different times.
Yeah, so maybe we can turn a page on some of those and be mindful of maybe when, if we're in our workplaces and we see someone starting to pay attention to their pain, we might encourage or invite them to do that if they're doing it in our presence, as well as can we play a role in other people addressing their pain? I mean, not, manually, but from a point of view that we're all kind of, I don't know, to use one term from psychology, co-regulating, right? The smoothness and evenness of your voice is, to me, to my ear at least, very soothing and kind of consciously and conscientiously reassuring. And at the same time, you're taking us through difficult ideas about ourselves and how we listen and understand. How can we be supportive to one another in relation to other people's pain?
I think it's really important, just as it is with emotions, when you see an opportunity to be with someone and to witness someone's physical pain, emotional pain. I don't want to speak too much to the emotional pain because I am not a psychologist, but the physical pain, I would say just allow for the experience and tell people you're noticing, that you see them. You see that they're uncomfortable. Is there something that they need, something that you can do to help? And just that little bit of being seen can be so powerful. And being careful not to immediately volunteer your experience that you think is similar, that is probably not what they're going through. So really letting them be in their experience.
Another question we have from Zoom is, what are your thoughts about how to become more intimate with and listen to your pain when you're sort of feel like you're doing those first levels or the first level or two, but you really want to kind of deepen your connection with it?
Well, yeah, this makes me think of meditation, frankly, but that looks different for everybody. It's about quieting the mind. I think a big part of what I hear from my patients is that there's this value in the moment that I leave them alone in the room with the heat on, listening to soft music. It all sounds very new age, but and for some people it's torture apparently. But for the most part, It's that moment where you're forced to be quiet. And we don't do that for ourselves enough. So if you can find a way to force yourself to be quiet, breathing, maybe it's going outside and communing with the trees. Maybe it's just turning off your lights, your bright lights, fluorescent lights at the office. It's going to be different having tea, but doing a mindful check-in is really the key. And there's a lot of science behind the mindfulness and pain alleviation connection. So, that might be why.
Wow. And so, maybe in a way we can tune into a different voice besides those storytelling chatters, and it could be something a little closer to my pain is trying to tell me something important. How do I listen to that pain and care for myself with it? And that mindfulness and meditation can play a role in that.
Yeah, I think that you're also bringing up a good point is the conversation. It's about the conversation. So that quiet time is also about listening to what your conversation is and taking the opportunity to take control of the conversation. And when you feel like you don't have words, you're not having that conversation, you're probably stuck in the emotions of it. And if you can do your best to find your words, it'll help you take a step back and maybe extract yourself from the emotion of it, if it's fear or anger or frustration. And that will help you see what's actually in front of you, which may not be any of those things.
Wow. I just have to pause to take that in. That's such an expansive idea in and of itself, to really be present and open up to what our pain has to offer us. I think it was Jerry Seinfeld who said, pain is actually too much information all rushing in at once.
So true.
I feel a little pain trying to take all that you're having to offer to us and weaving it into my very little story of life, because what you're offering is so rich, and it promises a healthier relationship within ourselves as individuals, but also across individuals with children and with our friends and partners and people who we care about. Where do you see things going forward in your quest to address and alleviate pain? Are you working on some things that you're going to continue to unfold now that your talk will be released?
I'm really excited to mostly to hear and to see how the idea evolves and grows. I'm starting with some continuing education courses for massage therapists and other adjunctive peripheral professions, just to see how we can start shifting what we do in that patient encounter. When we have that opportunity to take in the history, what's going on for the patient. So that's where I'm starting, is addressing the healthcare providers, and I really hope that it just catches on, and I want to see where it goes.
Well, I think we all do. We all want to find a world that is more free from pain. You also closed your talk with the idea of not without pain, but with it. When you think of that, is there a way that we can really start to embrace pain as a living part of being a human, and you don't see a world where there's no pain? I noticed that's a rather interesting omission. If your intention is that we won't have any pain, that's not clear. What do you think pain is like in this, for lack of a better term, slightly more enlightened state of awareness? Is pain the same, or is it experienced differently?
I think the pain may not change. I think that our experience of it can change, and the quality of life, it can change exponentially based on that. But it's also, I really want to take a moment to be sure to be clear that the kind of pain that I'm talking about is not the pain that is truly chronic, which is secondary to disease or other underlying processes that don't have solutions. That's a completely different ballgame. And in that case, it's just a different ballgame. But When we're talking about the everyday aches and pains that we suppress until they're really 5-alarm fires, that's where this approach could save us from a lot of those 5-alarm fires. We could turn down the volume on a lot of pain before it even happens if we just pay attention right away.
Right, because if I follow you, a lot of the experience of pain is actually predictive. And if we can adjust what it is that we're predicting as our response to pain, that can really shift the way we feel it, and it can lessen its grip.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks to all the neuroscientists who do all the hard work researching. We're getting some really good insights.
Yes, I think I read along those lines that there was a study on pain that said that those who meditate regularly actually experience pain more acutely in some respects than people who do not, but their recovery from that instant of pain, and this is perhaps a different kind of pain that you're talking about, but it was interesting that in some it ends up being less pain. And there are all kinds of curious studies about this universal experience that if we become curious about, maybe and a little bit more willingly enter into rather than reluctantly resisting, then maybe we can be a little less stuck in the history repeating itself that is often our story of pain.
You're reminding me of another saying I've heard, and that is, let go or be dragged.
Say more about that.
Well, you're talking about, embracing it instead of fighting the idea that we have to have pain. If you go with it, you won't get dragged into it. You'll go willingly, and you can choose your experience, choose your adventure.
Wow.
To some degree.
Well, that is a very powerful invitation. We're just about at the top of our hour together. I wanted to see if you had anything you wanted to make sure you left us with, any closing thoughts or call to action that you'd like us to hold in our hearts and minds as we go forward together.
Yeah,
in our own way.
I want to be sure that people know that finding a way to live side by side with pain does not mean that you have to be in pain. Simple as that.
Living side by side with pain does not have to mean that we have to be in pain. Okay, well, thank you so much, Ya-Ling. I'm really looking forward to seeing where this can go from here, to hearing updates from you about how your work is continuing, and to continuing this journey of living that all of us are on in our own unique ways, and in some ways sharing what we can about both our pains and our discoveries and our learnings. Thank you for taking us into this really important new world of living better with pain instead of trying to just resist and get away from it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ya-Ling. Yes, it's been an absolute joy. And I want to thank all of our attendees for being here. And thank you for dealing with our minor technical issues. I know we did get some of your questions in, so thank you for doing that. There will be chat that will continue on the Facebook Live recording of this interview. So if you continue the conversation there, we will have a moderator also looking at questions, and hopefully we can get Ya-Ling to chime in on that as well. Thank you to our co-host and to our technical team and to Sno-Isle Libraries for creating this experience for you. And upcoming in the coming weeks and up until September 2nd, we have a number of additional events forthcoming. We hope you can join us again. We'd really love to hear your feedback on how you think this went, and to continue to optimize to improve your listening and learning, enjoyment, and meet your needs where you are. For that, thank you again, Ya-Ling, and thank you, TEDxSnoIsleLibraries. We'll see you again soon.
TEDxSnoIsleLibraries 2020 has been made possible through the generous support of corporate and community-based organizations who believe in the power of ideas and information. We'd like to thank these organizations for partnering with us. Coastal Community Bank, serving the financial needs of customers throughout Western Washington. Coastal Community Bank, where community is not just their middle name, it's how they do business. Community Transit of Snohomish County, providing public transportation alternatives and solutions which help people get from where they are to where they want to be. Overdrive, always innovating to help libraries transform by providing digital content such as ebooks, audiobooks, magazines, and video for public libraries. Washington Energy Services, providing heating, cooling, and other service solutions to help Puget Sound residents save energy and live better. And our founding partner, the Sno-Isle Libraries Foundation, committed to mobilizing people and resources to expand the reach of Sno-Isle Library services, promote civic engagement, and foster a lifetime of learning.